Every legend begins somewhere, not with glory, not with triumph, but with tragedy. Before the suit, before the name, before the world called him Spider-Man, there was just a boy. Peter Benjamin Parker was never meant to be a hero. He was a quiet kid from Queens, shy, bookish, awkward, raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben after his parents vanished under mysterious circumstances. He wasn't rich, he wasn't popular, he wasn't strong, but he was brilliant. While other kids played ball in the street, Peter built his own computers. He spoke the language of science, dreamed of atoms, equations, and galaxies far away. His world was a microscope. His life, small, contained, unnoticed, until fate bit back. It was supposed to be just another field trip, a tour through the wonders of science. But in a single, fleeting moment, Peter's world changed. A genetically altered spider sank its fangs into his hand, and everything changed. At first it was pain, then fever, confusion. But when he awoke, he was different, faster, stronger, more agile than anything human. He could stick to walls, see in ways he never imagined, and somehow, he could sense danger before it struck. For the first time in his life, Peter Parker wasn't powerless, and that power went straight to his head. He crafted a costume, homemade, cheap, stitched together with teenage excitement. He entered a wrestling ring for prize money, laughed as he tossed grown men across the mat. He went viral. He got attention. He had the crowd in the palm of his hand. And one night, when a thief ran past, Peter didn't stop him. Why would he? He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero. Not my problem, he said. But that choice would destroy everything. That same thief would later corner a man, rob him, pull the trigger, and leave Ben Parker, the man who raised Peter, who gave him everything, bleeding in the street. But Peter arrived too late. He held Ben's hand. He begged him to stay. But the last words that would ever reach his ears weren't cries for help. They were a lesson, a legacy. With great power comes great responsibility. That sentence became a curse, a vow, a fire he could never put out. The boy died that night. The boy who wanted to be noticed. And in his place, something else rose. A masked figure, a symbol, a promise. He became Spider-Man. At first, he barely knew what he was doing. Nights spent swinging through the city with trembling hands, bones bruised, web fluid running dry. He patched up his suit with duct tape, failed, got back up, failed again. The media tore him apart. The Daily Bugle ran headlines calling him a menace, a criminal, a freak. But the city's cries for help, they didn't stop, so neither did he. He fought back alley thieves, pulled civilians from burning cars, stopped runaway trains with nothing but web and willpower. And yet, behind the mask, Peter was still just a kid. He struggled with school, with friendships, with grief. He watched his grades slip while saving lives. Lost jobs trying to hide his secret. Showed up late to everything that mattered. But always, he came through when someone needed him most. The world saw a mask, but the man behind it was breaking. And still, he stood tall. Villains began to rise. Not petty crooks, monsters. Men warped by science and pain. Not so different from himself. The vultures soared through the skies with stolen tech. The lizard, once his mentor, turned into a savage creature of instinct. Electro, Rhino, Sandman, each one testing his strength and his soul. And Peter kept fighting, because if he didn't, who would? He wasn't invincible. He bled, he lost, he cried when no one was watching. But he never gave up. And then, there was love. Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson. Both saw something in him, not just the hero, but the heart, and that heart would break again and again. Because being Spider-Man meant sacrifice. It meant watching people he loved walk away, or worse, fall. But Peter never stopped. Not because he enjoyed the pain, but because he understood it. He knew what it was to lose everything, and he'd spend the rest of his life making sure no one else had to. This was more than a costume, more than powers. This was redemption, responsibility, a promise to the man who raised him, and to the city that never saw his face. He was still clumsy, still awkward, still late to everything, but he was also something else. A guardian, a symbol, a legend in the making. And this was just the beginning. He thought the hardest part would be becoming Spider-Man, but the truth was, staying Spider-Man was far more brutal. Peter Parker had found his purpose. He had learned the cost of inaction, the burden of power. And now, night after night, He swung across the skyline of Queens, chasing every scream, every shadow, every broken cry beneath the roar of traffic and the glow of city lights. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing redemption. But Queens wasn't waiting with open arms. The world wasn't grateful. The city feared him. The media hunted him. J. Jonah Jameson turned Spider-Man into a headline villain, a public enemy with a face no one had seen, a vigilante, a menace, a danger to society. Peter didn't fight back with words. He fought back with action. He saved people who spat on him, pulled strangers from collapsed buildings, only to be blamed for the destruction. He showed up just in time and left just before anyone could thank him. He was the silent guardian of the borough, not because he wanted to be ignored, but because the mask made him something more than Peter Parker, more than human. But the battles were escalating. The streets weren't filled with just personages and car thieves anymore. No, something darker was rising. The villains he faced weren't random. They weren't ordinary. They were personal. Dr. Otto Octavius, a brilliant mind, twisted by ambition and mechanical arms fused to his body, became Doc Ock. He once admired Peter's intellect, and now sought to crush it beneath metal claws. Norman Osborn, the powerful industrialist, a father figure to some, a monster underneath. His descent into madness birthed the Green Goblin, a nightmare on a glider, cackling through explosions. His hatred wasn't blind. It was sharp, precise, personal. These weren't just battles. They were reflections, broken mirrors of Peter's own mind, geniuses shattered by ego, by trauma, by loss. Peter could have been any of them, if not for the lesson burned into his soul. But each victory cost him. He came home bruised, web shooters empty, homework undone, jobs lost, friends confused, Aunt May growing suspicious. He lived a lie, even with the people he loved the most, and love that was the sharpest cut. He loved Gwen Stacy, her light, her intelligence, her grace. But secrets don't protect the ones you love. They isolate them. She deserved the truth. He wanted to give it, but fear held him back. Fear that she'd see the real him and walk away. She didn't. She saw the broken boy under the mask and chose to stay. That made her his greatest strength and his deepest vulnerability. Because in this life, villains didn't just attack Spider-Man. They attacked Peter Parker. And no matter how fast he swung, he couldn't save everyone. Still, he kept moving. Day after day, villain after villain. The Rhino, unstoppable force. Electro, raw energy incarnate. Shocker, Mysterio, Scorpion, Chameleon, each testing a different side of him. He studied them, outwitted them, adapted. But every time he found balance, the world shifted beneath his feet. School gave way to college. Midtown High became Empire State University. Peter juggled lab work, lectures, patrols, and part-time gigs. He sold photos of himself to the Bugle just to pay rent. The irony was cruel. To survive, Spider-Man had to exploit Spider-Man. But even as the city stayed hostile, some began to believe. A boy he once saved wore a Spider-Man t-shirt with pride. A mother whispered thank you when no one else could hear. Hope began to flicker, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. And just when Peter started to think he could live both lives, it all came crashing down. Norman discovered the truth. The Goblin attacked Peter's heart, not just his body. Gwen was caught in the chaos. Bridges' screams. A fall that shouldn't have happened. Peter reached for her. He always reached. But this time he was too late. The snap wasn't from his web. It was from her spine. And in that moment, Peter Parker broke. The world didn't mourn her. It didn't know what had been lost. But Peter did. He carried it in his silence, in the way he stopped smiling, in the way Spider-Man disappeared for days at a time, returning with bruises and rage. He blamed himself. He always did. But through the grief, something deeper took hold. A resolve. If he couldn't save everyone, he would still save someone. If he couldn't be happy, he would still do good. Because Spider-Man wasn't about victory. He was about responsibility. He stood not because it was easy, but because it was right. Peter Parker, the boy, was vanishing. In his place, the hero was forming, hardened by loss, sharpened by guilt, tempered by sacrifice. He didn't ask for this power, but he bore its weight. Because even when the city hated him, even when his enemies rose again and again, even when love turned to ash, Spider-Man still believed, and that belief was his true strength. He wasn't a god. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even safe, but he was there, on the rooftops, in the alleys, in every corner of Queens where fear once ruled. Because if Spider-Man didn't show up, no one else would. And though the pain never left him, neither did the promise. The promise that started it all. With great power comes great responsibility. There comes a moment in every hero's life when the cost becomes too high, when the line between sacrifice and self-destruction begins to blur. For Peter Parker, that line was erased long ago. He had seen death, he had buried love, and still, he wore the mask. Not for recognition, not for praise, but because he couldn't stop, because the burden of doing nothing would haunt him more than the bruises ever could. But even Spider-Man has limits. The city never slept, and neither did he. His days were lectures and part-time jobs. His nights were screams and sirens. The calendar meant nothing. Holidays vanished into alleyways. Birthdays were spent bleeding under moonlight. And through it all, he smiled. Because if he didn't, the pain would consume him. He tried to live again, to love again. Mary Jane Watson, she was fire and light and gravity, a spark in his darkest moments. She saw through the sarcasm, through the tired eyes and awkward excuses. She loved both the boy and the man. And for a while, Peter believed, maybe, just maybe, he could have both. But the life of Spider-Man does not tolerate normal. It doesn't allow balance. It demands everything. Every date missed, every lie told. Every time Peter stood her up, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because someone else needed saving. Because Spider-Man always came first. Not by choice, but by duty, and that duty began to fracture him. Enemies returned, stronger, crueler. The Sinister Six, a coalition of chaos, formed to end him. Vulture, Mysterio, Kraven, Electro, Sandman, Doc Ock, each one had lost to him alone, but together, they nearly broke him. The battles weren't just physical anymore, they were psychological. He was outnumbered, outplanned, outmatched. And when the dust settled, Spider-Man didn't win. He survived. Barely. His reputation suffered, his body scarred, his relationships strained to the breaking point. Still, he endured, because that's what Spider-Man did. But then, the symbiote came, a living shadow, an alien parasite. It offered him everything he wanted, strength without effort, speed without pain, the ability to win without bleeding. Peter didn't realize it was changing him. Not at first. He was sleeping better, hitting harder, swinging faster. He felt invincible. And the city noticed. Crime plummeted. Criminals feared him again. But so did his friends. He was colder, angrier, crueler. He didn't stop. Criminals, he punished them. And when he looked in the mirror, the reflection no longer blinked back. Eventually, Peter tore the black suit from his skin, screaming in a church tower as the bells rang. The symbiote, rejected, found another Eddie Brock, and from their rage was born Venom, a monster with Peter's memories, his powers, and none of his mercy. Peter had created him, just like he created so many of his enemies, because every lie told to protect his identity, every secret kept from those he loved. It built a wall, and on the other side of that wall stood the villains, people broken by choices, many of them his own. Harry Osborn, his best friend, poisoned by vengeance and family legacy, became a new goblin. Flint Marko, a man who only wanted to help his daughter, turned to sand. Even Kurt Connors, a mentor, a man of science, became the Lizard because of Peter's influence. The weight of guilt grew unbearable, so Peter tried to push it all away, to choose happiness, to leave the mask behind. There were moments when he almost did, moments in Mary Jane's arms, moments watching the sunrise from a quiet rooftop. Moments where the world didn't need Spider-Man, not for a breath, not for a heartbeat. But the world never stays quiet. The Kingpin ruled the underworld. Shadowy organizations hunted metahumans. Corruption infected law enforcement. And Peter, whether he wanted to or not, was pulled back into the storm. Not because he was the strongest, but because he was the one who refused to stay down. And then came the war. Heroes fought heroes. Civil war tore the Avengers apart. Lines were drawn, trust shattered. The government demanded accountability, secret identities exposed. The world was no longer safe for masks. And Peter, always torn between worlds, was asked to choose. Tony Stark, Iron Man, offered him a place in the sun. Tech, security, resources, family. He revealed his identity to the world, standing tall, beside the man he once idolized. but the consequences were swift and merciless. His enemies now had a name, a face. Aunt May was shot. Mary Jane threatened. The people he fought to protect became targets. Peter's choice cost him everything. So he ran from fame, from politics, from Stark, back to the shadows. He joined Captain America's side, not out of rebellion, but out of principle, because freedom, choice, privacy, these things mattered more than convenience. He paid for that choice. He lost allies, lost protections, but not his purpose. He made a deal with the devil, literally, to erase his identity from public memory, sacrificing his own marriage, his own happiness, to keep others safe. No one remembered Peter Parker was Spider-Man, but he did. He always would, because the mask wasn't a curse. It was a crucible, and Peter Parker was forged in fire. The story of Spider-Man was never just about Peter Parker. It was about what he stood for, the idea that anyone, no matter how ordinary, could rise when everything else fell. Peter had endured more than most men could imagine. He lost family, love, even parts of himself, and yet, day after day, he rose, not because he could, because he had to, but something was changing, something bigger, across time, across dimensions, across the fabric of space itself. Other webs were being woven, and Peter began to realize he wasn't alone. There was Miles Morales, a boy bitten in a world where Peter had died, young, uncertain, but burning with the same fire. There was Gwen Stacy, reborn in another universe, not as a victim, but as a hero. Spider-Woman, fierce, agile, brilliant. There was Spider-Man 2099, from a dystopian future, carrying the name not for legacy, but for rebellion. There was Penny Parker, in a mech suit, Peter Porker, a cartoon pig, even Spider-Noir, trenchcoat and revolver, swinging through shadowed alleys of a black and white world. It sounded impossible. It was impossible, but it was real. The multiverse had opened, and Peter, the Peter from Earth 616, was no longer just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He was a thread in something infinite. When the Spider-Verse collided, so did their enemies. The inheritors, hunters, who fed on spider totems across dimensions, threatened all their worlds. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about survival. It was about connection. Peter, older now, worn by years of sacrifice, became something more than a mentor. He became the anchor, the one they looked to, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the first dot. He taught Miles how to leap. He taught Gwen how to carry guilt without drowning. He taught every version of himself that pain didn't define them, choice did. But even as the multiverse spun outward, Peter's world kept turning. He grew older, his hair grayed. The city changed, and still. The people called for Spider-Man. Sometimes he answered, sometimes others did, because Spider-Man had become a mantle, an idea greater than any single man. It could be a kid from Brooklyn, a punk rocker, a woman, a clone, a robot. It didn't matter. What mattered was the heart, the willingness to lose and still fight, to hurt and still help, to stand, even when standing meant falling again. Peter lived through wars, invasions, and timelines that rewrote history. He fought with gods, battled demons. He swung through civil wars and secret wars. He traveled across the stars. He returned to find home changed, and still, he protected it. He never stopped loving, never stopped hurting, but through it all, he never stopped being Peter Parker, the man who once watched his uncle die, the boy who let a thief go and paid with everything, the hero who carried the city on his back without ever asking for thanks. Because Spider-Man's greatest power wasn't strength, it wasn't his webs or agility or reflexes, it was responsibility, and no one bore it like Peter. He fought not for revenge, not for glory, but because no one else could do what he did and still keep their soul intact. And in the end, when the city sleeps and the wind moves gently through the alleys, somewhere, a figure swings above the rooftops. He may wear red and blue, he may wear black, he may be someone new, or someone familiar, but the world still knows the name, not because of the battles won, but because of the ones he never walked away from. He is Peter Parker, he is Miles Morales, he is Gwen Stacy, he is all of them. Because Spider-Man is more than a person. He is a legend, a web that connects the impossible, a symbol for every soul who has ever faced tragedy and chose to rise anyway. And as long as there is pain, as long as there is injustice, as long as one voice cries for help, Spider-Man will answer, because he always does, because that is the price of the mask, and the promise of the man beneath it.